Talk a little bit about the Ole Miss game against Tulane in New Orleans over the weekend. Ole Miss wins the game, and I think most people would agree that the final score is not indicative of how close that game was for a majority of the game. Rebels win it 37-20. Another game where Quinshon Judkins is not heavily involved, at least in terms of rushing numbers. He did have 18 carries in the game, but Tulane kind of sold out to try and stop the run. And I think that's something that Ole Miss teams are going to continue to see, which is going to continue to highlight the importance of Jaxson Dart throwing the football, which he did pretty well on Saturday, and also the importance of the wide receivers contributing. And the most important, or at least the most productive wide receiver so far this year, Trey Harris, played only 3 snaps on Saturday. They were a productive 3 snaps. He had 2 catches in those 3 snaps for 55 yards and a touchdown, including 20 yards after a catch getting into the end zone. So if you're counting at home, he has played 5 quarters this year with 5 receiving touchdowns. I talked to somebody as I was coming home from the airport yesterday who said arguably the most productive start to a career for a wide receiver in Ole Miss football history.
And then the possibility of not getting to capitalize on that for at least a few weeks.
Yeah, don't know. I mean, somebody texted me a little while ago and said, hey, do you have any information about Trey Harris and his availability? I was like, I know nothing. Now, I've read online everything from several weeks to possibly Saturday. So who knows? We'll see. And it's not like Ole Miss is going to be helpful with injury information. Lane Kiffin was adamant about that even after the game on Saturday. So, Borky, you were in New Orleans. You watched it closely. You did the Rebel Report podcast with some immediate reaction after the game was over. If you missed that and you want to hear what Borky had to say about the game, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts and here at SuperTalk.fm. So, Ole Miss gets the win. I think one of the biggest storylines is, at least in the first half, it was a different story in the second half. But in the first half, Tulane dominated the line of scrimmage.
They did. And that is – and look, you were right. There were times where Ole Miss was trying to run against 8, 9, 10-man boxes sometimes. Tulane sold out to stop the run, and they did so successfully. But even with the numbers disadvantage, Jaxson Dart was under pressure, it felt like every single drop back. The offensive line for Ole Miss played an atrocious game in New Orleans. They were awful, and they were saved by their defense, which is weird to say, but they were. They were saved by their defense, and they were saved by their quarterback being, for some reason, anytime a football fan sees their team struggling, they think the answer is put in the backup quarterback. It is a phenomenon that absolutely blows my mind. There were people calling for Jameis Winston at the Saints game yesterday sitting around us. It's a common thing among sports fans everywhere. Jaxson Dart is why you had a 20-point second half for your offense. He is why you won that game. Taking him out of that game would have been a stupid decision from Lane Kiffin, and he didn't make it because he's not stupid. Because offensive line was horrible, and his elusiveness in the pocket led to not just the one game-saving play, but that's what kept Ole Miss in the game while Pete Golding's defense were getting stops to their credit. But offensive line, a disaster. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? An optimist would say you got great quarterback play. Jaxson Dart has solidified his status as the leader of that team. He knows the offense well. He played well. The numbers don't say he played well, but when you watch the game, he played really well considering the circumstances. And defensively, they got a bunch of stops, especially in the second half, controlled the line of scrimmage. Nobody was open. So even if Michael Pratt played, at least in the second half of that game, he didn't have very many open wide receivers. Ole Miss played well defensively. But a pessimist would say Harris got hurt, and the way they looked up front on the offensive line is not going to lead to a bunch of wins if that doesn't improve in pretty short order.
Yeah, and the pushback, you and I were talking about this morning, that I might give to that is, well, welcome to the SEC. You show me somebody that's looked great for 2 weeks.
And that's kind of the theme of these two teams,
you can't
right?
do it.
No, and we talked about State a second ago. We'll keep talking about these games as the day goes on, but isn't that kind of what we learned this weekend? That winning is hard, and you should enjoy it every time it happens? Because Mississippi State fans are a little worried about the way the offense looked, and frankly, they should be. There was no explosiveness, and you're not beating LSU in 6 days or 5 days if you're not a little bit more explosive offensively. Fair concern. Ole Miss fans are worried about the offensive line because it was awful. Fair concern. And then the Harris injury as well on top of that. Tell me one team not named Georgia, and even their fans are worried today about their offense right now also. But among the other 11 teams in the SEC, tell me that there's one without a glaring, ooh, that is really bad on their team.
Yeah.
Alabama can't get after the quarterback. They can't rush the passer. And apparently,
can't cover on the back end of the defense.
Can't cover.
So let's get to more of that, but let's finish up on this Ole Miss Tulane game. So on the defensive side, Trey Washington finishes the game with 8 tackles. That leads the way. He bit hard on a stop and go route from a wide receiver that it ended up being a touchdown, but otherwise played a pretty good game. Kari Coleman was big, 7 tackles and a sack. Isaac Ukwu had a sack in the game. He had 6 tackles.
Ukwu, Pegues, Ivy.
Jared Ivey had a sack, also had a scoop and score for a touchdown.
Yeah, they called that a thick 6 at the press conference today. That's what the team calls it, a thick 6. Because a thick man picked up the ball and went and scored.
Okay.
I get it. I get it.
I got you. DeAndre Prince played a really good game.
He was what you were hoping going into the season he would be in the second half. Just lockdown. They tested him a couple of times, and again, receiver was so covered, no quarterback was completing a pass on DeAndre Prince in the second half with how he covered.
And I feel like there are a lot of people, and, fair, have kind of wondered out loud, well, how would this game have turned out if Michael Pratt had played? And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. There's part of me that goes, well, Tulane's probably even a little more effective on offense than they were. But the other part of that is clearly he wasn't 100%, so if he had forced himself into that game, would he have been less mobile than Kai Horton was? Ole Miss got 4 sacks of Kai Horton in the game. I don't know. Okay, if you want to go like completely hypothetical, if a 100% healthy Michael Pratt plays, is the outcome different? Maybe.
It's certainly possible.
But I don't know.
But
as it stands right now, Ole Miss has the single best win of any team in the SEC through 2 weeks. Now, it's not a Power 5 win, but it's a road top 25 win.
Yeah, the SEC's done a lot of losing against Power 5 teams lately. Shout out Mississippi State getting a Power 5 win.
Absolutely.
There's not many, but yeah, and in the second half, again, I keep going back to the second half because they really got better as the game went on, made some adjustments, figured out the backup, whatever, but they controlled the line of scrimmage on defense, and receivers were covered. And so I don't know how effective, and maybe Pratt would have been the difference, but when Ole Miss was shutting down the run and nobody was open, what can a quarterback do? You know what I mean? Ole Miss dominated defensively in the second half of that game. They did.
So Ole Miss was down 17-10 at the half, and they outscored/outplayed Tulane in the second half to the tune of 27-3.
And
that's dominance.
And their defense even outscored Tulane because of the forced fumble return for a touchdown. So,
hey, Dad, only a minute left. Were you able to watch most of this game because of State's later start?
I was.
What'd you think?
I was, and I thought Ole Miss, they showed a lot of resilience the way they came back in this game. Being on the road, we talked about that on Friday about how if you don't get off to a fast start in these road games, sometimes it can go bad. Ole Miss came back. They got the win. I thought Dart was very impressive. But after 2 games, my biggest question about this team is where is Quinshon Judkins? Where are the big numbers? He hasn't put them up yet, so we'll see how that pans out for him.
He was incapable of running. No running back. Alvin Kamara would not have had a good day on Saturday with what Ole Miss was up front.
Then that's not good.
in the first game, it's easily explainable. It's less explainable this week unless you just say, okay, if the defense absolutely sells out to do nothing but stop the run, you have to take advantage of other things. What did you learn about Ole Miss on Saturday that you carry forward? Into Georgia Tech this weekend, into Alabama the next weekend, into LSU the weekend after that, and Arkansas the weekend after that.
So what have we learned, right? Not what questions arose from the game, but what did we learn about the game itself?
What do we know? What do we know about Mississippi State? What do we know about Ole Miss after 2 weeks?
We know that Ole Miss has improved at quarterback. And again, I know it's just 2 weeks. It's Tulane, it's Mercer. I get it. I think Jaxson Dart was exactly right when he said last year's team doesn't win that game, because I think last year's quarterback doesn't win that game. He was under duress for what felt like every single snap. And other guys get rattled in those spots. And despite taking hit after hit and dealing with rusher after rusher in a close game that probably shouldn't have been but was anyway, he put that offense on his back and carried him in the second half. I think that you know what you have at quarterback. Let me phrase it this way. We don't yet know what his ceiling is, but I think it's pretty clear he's elevated his floor.
Yeah. He had one massive passing game a year ago. And it was against Vanderbilt, right? Didn't he go for like 400 yards against Vanderbilt?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen back-to-back games where he's been, in the 270 range. He was over 300 against Mercer in the opener and 270 this week against Tulane. My question, what do we know? We know Ole Miss's offensive line's got to be better than it was if Ole Miss is going to run the ball. And we know that Ole Miss has got to figure out a way to punish defenses who stack the box to stop the run. Because I don't think this Ole Miss team is a one-trick pony, right? I don't think they are a football team that's like, well, they can run the ball, but they can't throw it. I think you got a quarterback that can throw it. And you've got some receivers that can go get it as well. You're going to have to take advantage of what the defense gives. And if the defense says, we're selling out to stop the run, you say, okay, we're fine with that. And a question that I've got, did something change with Michael Trigg? Did something change with Michael Trigg on Saturday? Did you finally get the spark to get him fully engaged so that he can potentially capitalize on the talent that is there? Because that could be a game changer. Not to mention getting Caden Prieskorn back.